Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to our developing and writing funding application session today. My name is Dr. Eve Hayes de Calaf, and I am a researcher and also currently responsible for research training at the School of Advanced Study. And I have the pleasure of welcoming three colleagues today who will be discussing funding applications in all their glorious forms as well. I think this is a very popular, this has been a very popular course, and we've had a really impressive sign up to this. So I do hope that everybody finds value and really gets a lot out of this session. So without further ado then, I'm delighted to introduce Professor Philip Murphy, who is currently Director of History and Policy at the Institute of Historical Research here at the School of Advanced Study, and Professor of British and Commonwealth History. With him is also Dr. Andrew Fairweather-Tall, who is currently Director of Research and Innovation, as well as Dr. Joseph Ford, who is a Senior Lecturer in French Studies. So yeah, I'll pass over to Philip now.
Thank you very much, Eve. I'm just going to show my screen. I thought it was sort of useful to have a number of people on this panel because there's no particularly sort of right way to go about this. And I think you'll probably find that we all have slightly different views and approaches to this. And I suppose the first thing to stress is, if it doesn't sound too kind of defeatist, why apply for major research funding in the first place? Is it the right thing for you to do for your career, for your project? And I'm talking here about the major research grants, where you're bringing together teams of researchers. I'm not so much talking about the small grants, which are very much geared to individual pieces of research. Why apply for a major research grant? Are you going to apply because your institution expects it? Well, it's probably not a great idea, given what we'll talk about in a minute, which is the relatively low success rates and the huge amount of work that goes into these. I mean, institutions often see winning research grants as marks of prestige. Well, they are to an extent. They often see them as a way of maintaining financial sustainability. Well, not so much. I mean, most research grants are money in, money out, and institutions sometimes need to be reminded of this. So think very carefully, because your institution may, over time, rethink its attitude to this anyway. Should I apply because it's good for my CV? Well, again, it's no bad thing to have some major research grants down there. But I know plenty of very well-respected scholars who haven't had major research grants, indeed, who've gone through this process again and again and haven't been successful. And again, it's not necessary in many cases in terms of people's individual research aims and objectives. Should you apply for a major research grant for your next book? Again, think very carefully about that. There are other ways around. I mean, you can apply for fellowships. You can try and gear your teaching more around your research aims so that the two are mutually reinforcing. Sometimes you get an attitude from major people who have major research grants. Well, this is going to be it. I've got £500,000 to write on this subject, to research this subject. this will be the only book that's worth having. It's not true. I mean, that's not how humanities work. We can all, as individuals, write about subjects on the basis of our own resources. So just be pretty ruthless. Remember what a large amount of work it is putting in a major research grant, and only do it really if the piece of research that you have in mind is only feasible with major research funding and team-based research. As I say, I know that sounds slightly defeatist, but be hard-headed about it before you go in. I remember years ago, and it kind of stuck in my mind, uh, attending a seminar about research funding. And it was stressed that the key thing was the so-called 3 Ps: the project, the people, and the place. And someone said, and again, for some reason, the phrase stuck in my mind, you know, in terms of the project, referees, funders are looking for a really good idea. It sounds ridiculously simple, but remember, you're going to have a number of different reviewers of your research project. And the thing that will click is just a great idea that you've managed to kind of convey really clearly, and that will sort of, you know, that will see you through. And you think, why has no one thought of this before? And you can have as elaborate an application as you like, but if there isn't a really exciting idea there at its core, it's going to be difficult to pull off. The second P is the people. It's always this question: have you got the right team with the right mix of expertise to do this? And the third P is the place. Why should a research application arising from this institution, this location, be suitable for funding? And that's partly about, you know, the nature of your institution, its track record, its links. As it happens, I've had 2 big AHRC awards, and they both arose out of the Institute for Commonwealth Studies. So it's thinking, well, what can something called the Institute of Commonwealth Studies, with its track record, with its reputation, do that other institutions would find difficult to do? So really kind of banging home those 3 Ps, I think, is very important. And Andrew will talk in a minute about how we get started. I mean, when you look at the sort of the application process for some of these big awards, it can seem, you know, pretty intimidating at first. I find that a kind of good way in, just for your own purposes, starting to think about these things, is to sketch out what is a standard document, which is the sort of basic case for support. And, you know, they will vary, but they will usually have the following elements to them. So your basic aims and objectives, the research context, which is the thing that I think you'll find will take you the longest to do properly. And sometimes it's worth trying to get a little bit of seed corn funding to get someone in to do this really thorough historiographical sifting and decide where there's an opportunity, not just to fill a gap, but to make a major contribution. Think about what your research methodology is going to be, and think about how it fits with the remit, the disciplinary remit of your funders and your funding scheme. think about what's a viable timetable and how those elements would fit together. What are your outputs going to be, and what's your strategy for dissemination? And to put in a very blatant plug for history and policy, because why else get involved? History and policy, my unit engages in policy engagement work. So we're trying to explain to policymakers of all sorts why history is important and valuable. So do please, if policy engagement is part of your dissemination strategy, please do talk to me and to us about that. So that's the blatant advert out of the way, and I'll hand over to Andrew, who's got some slides as well.
Hello, everybody. Just wait 1 second while I find the right document. Can somebody just give me a quick wave to say that you can see that?
Yeah, we can see it fine, Andrew.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much for having me this morning. As Eve said earlier, I'm Director of Research and Innovation at the University of London, and I wanted to share some of my thoughts and feelings about research funding that has been developed over more years than I care to remember in research services. So,
perhaps just put it on full screen.
Sorry, can you see the next slide? Because mine's not working.
Yeah, you need to put it on full screen so that we can see it.
Thank you. Okay, rookie error. I do apologise.
Perfect.
There we go. So I'm sharing you my profile here, just for one very brief point and reason to note that part of thinking about research funding is why you fit with the scheme personally, as well as why your project fits. So if you are thinking about particularly Research Council projects these days, you'll be asked to fill in a narrative CV, which means that you need to think about the skills and experiences that you've had that make you the right leader for the project that you're intending to develop. So this is what I wrote for me, not for a funding application, but just as a reflection, and it's actually on my LinkedIn profile. So I just wanted to flag this for you, and one of those exercises that Philip talked about, you might want to actually just think, why are you the best person to do this? You have a great idea, but what is it that you bring that is more than just the research? I thought I'd then just talk a little bit about the different funders, and Philip alluded to this, but I do think that it's really important to think not just of what you want to do, but who you want to apply to, because all of these funders have very different perspectives on what they want to fund, what they like to see in their application. They will also have different funding levels. So I think that you need to think through both with yourself, but also with others about which ones actually meet the kind of research that you want to do best. So if you are an early career researcher, be careful, because all of the funders that you see on the screen have slightly different definitions of early career. And indeed, the AHRC has actually stopped defining early career, and now has wording that says something along the lines of it's your lived experience that counts of being early career. And I think the other thing I'd just say is that although all of these will have different ways of looking at it, what they all want to do really is to fund the most promising research. I mean, of course, that's true, but you should see their guidance as being informative and supportive of you submitting the best application. Now, at this point, I wanted to just check that you were all awake and listening. So we're going to run a little poll just as an experiment. I think it comes up on screen now. And it's basically asking you about success rates. And I'm very interested to see what you think the answer is. Okay, I think the poll is slowing down. I'll give it a couple more seconds for the last 20 or so people to make up their minds. Okay, Eve, do you want to end the poll now? And share the results. Right, can we see those? Can we see those? Yeah. Okay, so congratulations to the very hopeful person who thinks that success rates are a third or above. I wish, I'm afraid not. And congratulations to those of you who are most pessimistic, because I'm afraid you're right. And at least at the moment, the success rate for the British Academy postdoc scheme is 8%, and for Leverhulme it's 10%. Although last year, and this may be where a third of you were landing, last year Leverhulme's success rate was actually 18%, so it's improved massively in 1 year. But so anyway, I think my point for this slide was simply that, does it actually matter? Okay, and I haven't had a question there. I wish now I'd had a second poll, which was, do you think it matters or not? I will tell you why I don't think it matters. I think that it gives you some sort of reality check. However, the question you really should be asking is, of the institution you're applying for, what is their success rate? That's the first thing I would advise you. And secondly, is it really going to stop you applying? I mean, you can go into this with your eyes open, but whether it's a 10% or a 50% success rate, it shouldn't deter you one way or the other. Okay, can we take the poll off now? I think we can, can't we? And I shall move on, I hope.
That should be taken off now.
Thank you. So I thought I'd now think about what you might do to think about, or what you might think about in developing a project. Some of this is overlapping with what Philip said, but I think this is about not just thinking about why you want to apply, but this is when you want to apply, what you should be considering. So clearly you have to have a clear and succinct set of research questions. And I say clearly, however, that's not always obvious. And I think that sometimes the hardest part of developing a research proposal is about really refining down what it is that you want to do and why that matters. And I think that this is part of what any good research services department should be asking you to develop while you're working with them. Next is thinking about what you can do before you apply. So what pilot or preliminary work have you already done, or could you do, that would help inform a panel that's looking at your proposal? So anything that you can say about, I've done this before and I know that there is this set of evidence, and I've done a little bit of it and I know now that I can do the rest of it in the next 3 years, for example. But I do think it's really important to be able to say what you've already done and why this means that you have a good sense of what's out there. The next point is just about thinking about all of this in the round, and how will you explain it to somebody else who's outside your field. The reason why that's important is that peer reviewers, certainly these days, but possibly always, are unlikely to be perfect specialists in your particular research field. So you need to be able to be clear enough so that a sensible, intelligent person who understands your field will understand what you're talking about. And there are times when methods and discipline-specific language can get in the way of explaining that clearly. So I would always advise that if you can talk to your partner or significant other or whoever it is, a friend, and explain why this is important and what you're going to do, that's a good test of how clearly you understand the project and can write about it.
Could I sort of just reinforce that, Andrew? And I think it's absolutely crucial that the language is as clear as possible. And my own preference is to go right in at the beginning under aims and objectives and say, this project will do this. I mean, just absolutely as clear as that, because, you know, speaking as someone, other people on the panel will have done this as well, who have been on the HRC peer review panel. Again, peer reviewers may not be exactly specialists, but they, you know, they also have lots of competing demands. They will want to kind of, you know, get the peer review done as quickly as possible. You mustn't leave them trying to figure out what this project is about. It's just basically irritating. You've got to grab them straight away with a sense that you know precisely what you're doing. I think it's quite important. Sorry, Andrew.
No, don't apologize. Absolutely, Philip, and quite important. I think extremely important, but not easy to do.
Yeah.
So I think that the message is about refinement here, and working through drafts and iterating until you have it down to where you're satisfied. So you may have seen I gave you a preview of my next point just before, but do talk early to your equivalent of research services. And if you don't know who that is, find out. Almost every university in the UK will have at least one and possibly a team of people who are there to support research applications. So find out who yours is. And please do remember, and this is from personal experience, that your application is not the only one they're going to be dealing with. So do expect them a bit of a delay, or perhaps that they need for you to wait, or whatever. But you know, most research services will be dealing with multiple applications at the same time. Obviously, what they will do well is advise you on things like budget and costings. You can help by making sure that you have the information about what you really want to do, and if you can, quantify that. And if you have specific requirements, if you know your field well and have done it before, give some indication of costs. And for example, on that, things like transcription of interviews is always one that it's a judgment call. And I think you are best placed to make judgment. Research services will cost whatever you whatever you ask. But if you can give them a steer, then that will be very helpful and will speed things along. Similarly, if you are working with other institutions, then obviously make sure that they are connected in with your research services as well, just to smooth the process. This one goes back to what Philip was sharing about the sorts of things that are required for almost any research project. But I think it's quite useful to be able to map out the application criteria that you'll find in scheme guidance notes, and just think about how you will answer each of those. That means they may go in multiple sections of the actual application, but at least if you can start thinking through systematically how you're going to answer those criteria, then it will help you as you start writing. And when you start writing, there is an awkward balance, and I see this all the time, and I appreciate, and I'm sure all of you have experienced it. There's a balance between being ambitious and therefore attractive as a researcher and a research project for a funder by saying, yes, I am going to change my discipline by doing X. However, there's also a credibility threshold in that. And so I think you have to be really rigorous about how you balance that ambition with the actual achievable goals. I think that one of the challenges that I see very often with applications is those that really you understand the enthusiasm of the researcher for what they're doing, but then you realise that either the budget or the time scale or just the sense of what's deliverable within the framework that the funder gives is a mismatch. And so, I think you have to be aware that you've both got to be able to show your the way you are going to change things, or you are going to develop your field, but you also need to make sure that you are practical in how you're going to do it. Because ultimately, this is a research project, and whether you're an early career researcher or you are senior, you've got to end up with a project that looks like it's feasible to do in the time scale that you give. I don't think I need to talk much about taking lots of advice. Obviously, you're all on the call here, right? So you're already beginning to do that. But do talk to other people about your project, colleagues, research services, but anyone that you feel that can usefully contribute. Equally, though, remember it's your project. So you'll get lots of advice back, particularly from research services, but ultimately this is what you want to do. So you can call out advice and say, no, okay, thank you for that, but actually I don't, I know what I want to do. Trust yourself is what I'm saying. And then a couple of final appeals around timing. Again, this is the thing that most often happens, I think is the primary cause of most failures, is you don't give yourself enough time to do all the stuff that you're supposed to do before the deadline comes up. And that last point, a rushed application is almost certain to fail, is my experience in the last 20 years.
Again, Andrew, can I sort of just underline one or two of those headings? Because I think they're really, really important. On taking lots of advice, I think, for humanities scholars, that's often around the technical aspects of the thing. Anything you promise to do as part of a research project, the referees will drill into any weaknesses or ambiguities or holes in what you say. If you say you're going to create a website, you've got to be very clear how that's going to work, how it's going to be sustainable. If you're dealing with digital materials, you've got to be clear about how those will be delivered, how they will be sustainable in the long term. And often you'll need to produce a kind of technical annex, which you really, again, as humanities scholars, we're often not really able to do that off our own bats. We need a lot of advice on this. But let me promise you, if you promise to do anything and you haven't thought it through in the sort of fine technical details, you'll be tripped up on it. So it's really important to get that right. And in a similar way, when Andrew was talking about, yes, be ambitious, but not too ambitious, perhaps, you've got to think about anything you promise. If you're successful, you're going to have to deliver it. And so things like, often it's tempting to talk about bringing in international collaborators or international researchers who you're going to employ. Sometimes that would be right. Sometimes that would be what you need for the project, and that's going to be important. But remember that then you will slightly be at the mercy of other kind of agencies, of different universities, their research departments, their HR departments. some of the kind of, the biggest disputes that people get into around big research projects relate to transferring funds. And as head of that, as principal investigator, you'll have limited ability to actually, streamline that and get it right, but it might rebound on you. So in a way, don't overcomplicate things if it's not necessary. And I mean, finally, on what Andrew was saying at the beginning about choosing the right research funder and the right research scheme. I mean, for historians, there's often a question, should we go down the AHRC route or the ESRC route? And it's important to get that right, because you can have the best research proposal in the world from your disciplinary point of view, but if it goes to a board of reviewers of a distinctly different discipline, it can be pulled apart on that basis because you're not speaking in the same language. So yeah, just some thoughts again to reinforce those points that Andrew's made.
Right. Okay. Sorry, I seem to have lost all of you, your faces, but can somebody just shout out and say you can still see what I'm doing?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so I thought I'd just end with some reflections on what do you do afterwards? What do you do when you have submitted your application? And here are some suggestions. Obviously, pour yourself a glass of something that you fancy, but beyond that, do think about what you're going to do while you're waiting for an outcome. So a project submitted will take anywhere between 4 and 9 months to get an answer. So what can you do to continue working on it, but while you're waiting? If you're applying to to one of the research councils, you'll get an opportunity for a PI response. So that's about partway through. You get to see the reviews and you get to respond to what they have said. So if there is additional information that you can provide at that point, then that's always useful. If you're an ECR and you've applied for an ECR grant, do stay in touch with the institution that you've applied to. The occasional email just to say that you are still alive and you are still wanting to hold the grant through them is always appreciated. This touches on, the next point touches on something that Philip said about why do you want to apply for funding in the first place. All the ideas that you have spent so long articulating in your grant proposal are reusable elsewhere, whether that is for another funding proposal, whether that's for a book proposal, whether that's in your teaching, or whether that's in a project you might want to give to one of your students to complete. So do think about how you can reuse and repurpose the things that you have been so carefully crafting for the proposal. I mentioned be prepared for reviewers' comments, and I think that being prepared to answer carefully and thoughtfully the queries that peer reviewers provide you with is really important, and that includes the ones that you don't agree with, which may be most of them. And if you are invited to an interview, and again that depends on the scheme, prepare. And your research service department should be able to support you, provide you with a mock interview, provide you with guidance, or even put you in touch with somebody who's gone through an interview stage before. And please don't forget to say thank you. The number of people I've worked with who I've spent hours and hours with, and whatever happens, they then go off and do their own things. So that's a personal plea from me, but just for everyone to reflect on. And then finally, what will you do if this doesn't succeed? I think it's really important to take a moment to mourn. You have put a lot of time and effort into this. As you've seen from the poll, the success rates are not good. You can work hard on a project. You can feel it is absolutely the best you could possibly have done, and yet it may not make it through. In fact, actually, the probability is that it won't make it through. However, at least be proud of what you have actually done. You have crafted a project that is feasible and doable, and that you want to do. Think about where you could take it elsewhere once you've done your little mourning. And as I said before, you can consider recycling these projects into other formats. Particularly, I say this to ECRs, that whether or not you're successful, if you're not successful with a postdoc scheme, it is likely that whatever you have written would look good as a book proposal. And that is something that obviously that if you are called to interview at a university, they are going to be interested in what you're going to do next for your research. So it's not effort wasted. The other things that you will have done during that grant application are you'll have refined your ideas, you'll have thought carefully about your skills and experience, and hopefully you'll have established a broader network in making an application. And then this is a final point that I've made in different fora. You have to be honest about this and think about when to stop. So I've seen proposals that keep on coming through to different schemes, and everyone says no. At some point, you have to be realistic about it and say, okay, this is not going to work. I have to move on, or if I want to do it, I have to find another way of doing it. And thank you very much. I will stop sharing now, and I'm here for questions and comments.
Thanks very much, Andrew. And before we go to questions, I'm going to hand over to Joe Ford, who's going to talk about his experiences. And it'll be interesting to see how far those kind of connect to some of the things that we've been talking about already.
Yeah, thanks Philip and Andrew, and thanks Eve for convening today. Yeah, it's great to see so many people in the call. I hope I'm not going to disappoint you, because I'm not a historian by training. I actually come from modern languages, but my project is really a project. The project I'm working on at the moment is really a project on methodology and rethinking the kinds of methodologies that we use within modern languages as a discipline. So it might speak to the work that you're thinking of doing. Yeah, just a few things. I mean, about me, I've failed a lot at getting research funding. I've applied for major grants, for smaller grants, a lot, and I've failed a lot. I've also been lucky to be part of teams where we've been successful in getting money. And I think what I've realized over the years is I really like working with other people. And so collaborative is really something, collaborative funding opportunities and collaborative projects is something that I found in myself was the way I kind of prefer to work. And actually, when I've been part of teams, we've more often been successful in getting funding. We've also had to be creative about getting funding. So some of the schemes, some of the big grants that we have applied for years ago now, we repurposed for instance, into one of the successes we had was on one of the PhD schemes. So getting a PhD researcher in to work with us on questions that we'd previously wanted to explore in an aspect of a large grant project, but we weren't successful. So we kind of repurposed some of the ideas, some of the research the initial research we'd done for the bid into that application, and were successful. So it's also about thinking about where your ideas can be reused, I think, in different modes. It might not be a research grant that gets you buyout or a fellowship or whatever it is. It might be having an opportunity to bring someone else in, like a PhD student on a funded project. clearly that, you need the institutional support, as Andrew has mentioned, and it will vary based on your role within the university. So if you're not a permanent staff member, often that can mean you'll be going for more of the fellowship opportunities. So I appreciate there are also limitations on people in the room in terms of what they can apply for, what they're eligible for. Although I would just say the research councils are opening that up now in recognition of the fact that academic careers are much more varied and precarious. So I think that's something to keep an eye on with research councils. Yeah, a few things. I mean, Andrew mentioned the importance of the preliminary work. And Philip, I think you mentioned that small grants can be based around more individual projects. That's very true. My own experience actually is that having just got a small grant from the British Academy it's kind of in the foothills of a larger project. So what I'm doing is using that small grant. It's £10,000. It's not much money, but to bring an initial team of people together to consult in a kind of participatory way, in 3 participatory workshops on a larger bid that we're going to put together for the AHRC. And I think there are all sorts of things here like luck. I mean, the BA small grant scheme, these days you have to pass a quality threshold, and they kind of pick out bids at random once you've crossed that quality threshold. So I think, it's important to acknowledge that it's important to get past that quality threshold, but ultimately it's a question of luck once you're past that. So I think that's also, I've been lucky in a sense. So this is a collaborative project for me. I am working with my colleague, Jiminy Pinero Diaz, who works at the Institute with me here in the School of Advanced Study. And I'm also working with creative artists and freelancers on the project, who we're going to bring in and we're going to pay to consult on some of the ideas that we want to put forward into this larger bid to the HRC. I think that brings with it lots of ethical questions around the kind of methods that we're using, around paying researchers, we could call them co-researchers or freelancers for their time. But also not promising too much, because of course, as Andrew's been saying, the success rates are so low that there's no guarantee that this project will materialize in a larger form and that people will be able to be involved in that. So there's all sorts of things to consider, I think, for after you get the money and how you speak to people and how you liaise with your partners. The 3 Ps, the only one I would add to that is partnership, because I think it comes with the people, I suppose, the people and the place. But one of the in times when I think we've rushed a little bit on applications, we've forgotten the partners and we've gone to them late for letters. And it's very difficult. I think you need a relationship with these people. You need to have done some perhaps initial workshops with them. You need to have had many conversations with them, involve them in the process of consulting and writing the project. What are they getting out of it? I know a lot of the time we think about partners as giving support in kind. But actually, we might also think about how we can channel funding to elements of that partnership. So, for instance, by employing consultants on the project, it is possible to have a partner, not who you pay directly, but you can channel funding through to members of that organization or to some of the strategic aims that they might have as an organization. That's been something to consider with the partnership that we've been developing in relation to this bid. Yeah, I mean, I've also served on the peer review council for the HRC, and so I've seen a lot of applications come my way. I just wanted to kind of echo what Philip and Andrew have said. I think they're pretty desperate at times to get reviews for applications. My sense is, some applications that have been sent my way are from a whole range of projects that don't neatly sit within what my expertise is. And I think that's quite important, as has been said, to really explain very clearly from the off what you're doing and why it's important. And if it is something that's a disciplinary concern, then explain that. You know, it's not necessarily going to be a historian looking at your application. So explain that to colleagues who might sit outside, might be reviewing from outside their kind of comfort zone. The final thing I'll say, and then perhaps we'll leave time for questions, is when I've been successful at getting funding, there's been a kind of key distinction, because when I was an early career researcher, there was a lot of pressure to put in applications, A, because I needed a job, and B, because colleagues around me wanted to encourage me to kind of pursue ideas. And that was lovely. But at the same time, I felt, I don't think, when I failed, I don't think I ever felt like I was extremely passionate about a project. And I think for the first time in my career, I'm passionate about the projects that I want to pursue, and they've been successful. And I think that is quite important. And I think it picks up on many of the things that have been mentioned already around, you really have to be committed to this. You really have to put the time aside. You really have to want to do it. And I think that's just the final thing that I'll say. I hope that's come across in the applications that I've submitted. And I guess it kind of has, in the sense that they're the ones that have been successful, the ones that, you know, I've been passionate about and really wanted to do. Yeah, I guess I'll stop there and kind of open up. People might have questions. Thanks.
Thanks very much indeed. That's great. Eva, are you able to chair the question session?
Yeah, no problem, Philip. I can see we've had a number of questions that have come through already, and that some of them have been responded to and others haven't. The one thing I wanted to say before we kick off the Q&A was from my perspective as well, I think it's really, really helpful to get involved in anything like peer review or sitting on committees or any situation in which you actually are able to read other people's funding proposals and or support your colleagues in reading and reviewing what they're doing. And I say that as somebody who has unsuccessfully applied for a number of research bids, but actually each time you can see that as a building block. And as Andrew was saying, it can develop into other things. So in my case, it's developed into opportunities for publications, opportunities for organising conferences, but certainly any opportunity you have to either peer review or to support people in looking at how they put together their applications, be they successful or not, I think gives you a really clear idea about what you want to do. And the other point I wanted to say about that was think about outputs as well, because I know we talk about outputs in this kind of generalized way, but there are lots of really creative, really innovative ways that you can put forward outputs beyond, you know, just the kind of publication of a monograph or beyond journal articles. There are many, many things. And just in terms of our research training, we'll have a lot of upcoming opportunities to kind of discuss things that will relate to funding applications, including narrative CVs, talking about kind of creative outputs and others. So just keep an eye out for that. So I can see we have a number of questions. I think Andrew answered it, but I think it might be good to share with the group just specifically about what you mean by research services, Andrew, because obviously this looks different depending on the institution and depending kind of what how departments are structured. So do you want to say something specifically about, more specifically about what support people can look out for in their respective institutions?
Well, I'm afraid I'm not sure I can be specific, because so many universities have so many different approaches to how they provide support. But I think the consistency is that there should be somebody there on the end of an email who can answer your question about how do I apply through you for a grant. And if that's not obvious, then I think you should be checking websites, but you could be asking contacts within that institution, or if you're already a staff member, you should be prodding your head of department saying, this is ridiculous, why can't I find out who I can get in touch with? So I've stressed that's a UK perspective. I know that there are people on the call who are from overseas, and I think the provision is slightly more nuanced, particularly in Europe, as to whether you have people who support grant applications in quite the same way.
Okay, perfect. We have a question from Jacob here, and he's saying this is all really helpful, but one thing I always struggle with when writing funding applications is dealing with speculation. We don't know what we're going to find out until we do the research. Is there any advice on how to manage this? So managing the unexpected, or the or the uncertain, while we're still making a funding application persuasive? Great question.
Yeah, it's a really important question, because sometimes I think applications can be over-determined in terms of what they're sort of promising to deliver and show and find. And the point is to have really clear and commanding research questions. That's the thing. Research questions that can potentially deliver important results and actually match what the kind of the scope of the research is and the evidence that is likely to be there. But it's always worth kind of both giving yourself room for maneuver in terms of the way in which the project may take unexpected courses and directions along the way. And just being absolutely clear about the uncertainties that are there, while at the same time being clear that if certain routes don't prove productive, that there will be sort of a lot of other things that will actually be valuable in the research project. I don't know what Joe and Andrew feel about that.
I mean, one thing I might say, just add to that, Philip, I think that's absolutely right about the clarity of the research questions, and think about how they're going to be received. Again, to mention, as was mentioned before, about scholars who are not just within your field. And I wouldn't underestimate the power of doing some preliminary work. I think Andrew mentioned this.
Yeah.
It may be that you can get some small funding from your institution, some CCORN funding, and funding always helps, with the narrative, I think. Or it may be that you can run, or with that funding, you can run some small workshops to explore the ideas, to explore the research questions, to consult on the research questions with some of the research users or some of the kind of some of the participants that you might involve in your project. I'm conscious I'm speaking to specific projects that might be more collaborative and not necessarily to say an archival project, but it may even be that you've got that initial seed funding to go into the archives, I think, as Andrew was mentioning, and just bringing that narrative forth in terms of backing up your more speculative research questions. You of course, we have hypotheses as researchers, and I think that's fine. But having some initial findings that informs where those hypotheses are going, I think is important.
Okay.
Can I just answer a spot about that as well? Which I think that risk is always something that needs to be addressed in any project, and I think that funders do try and encourage risky research where the outcome is uncertain. But I think what you've got to be is honest and direct about that, and you've got to demonstrate the mitigations that you'll make if things don't work out. So if you think there's work in an archive, well, obviously, if you've gone there and said that I think there's this amount there and it'll take me this long, that's one thing. But if you say I'm not quite sure where this is going to take me, then you've got to discuss what happens if it takes you nowhere.
Mm.
Yeah, these are all excellent points. I'm aware that we've only got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to read one more question that we've got in the chat, and then I might ask a quick question just to wrap up. But so Saeed's asking about advice you would give specifically on research funding in the field of film and history.
Shall I do my facilitator job? I'm going to dodge the question, I'm afraid. And I'm just going to say that I think all the funders I've mentioned would be open to it. I think what you can do is you can investigate what they've funded in the past. If your institution has a software package, so for example, Research Professional, you can do a keyword search, although actually Google works just as well. And yes, and I think talk to your colleagues. What funding have they got? And act accordingly.
Okay, and Olivia's politely reminded me that she also put a question in the chat that I jumped over. So she's asking about ECR applications such as Lever Hume, AHRC, BA. What can or should applicants expect in terms of support from their sponsoring department senior colleagues who have expressed an interest in the project?
I think it's always important to get, you know, as well as the support you can get from your research office, to get informal feedback from colleagues, because colleagues will have kind of had a variety of different experiences relating to applying for funding, and can bring different perspectives. So the more people who are prepared to actually, you know, read drafts of the application, the better. And also, you know, they'll hone in on any weaknesses, any ambiguities, might give you advice in just basic sort of drafting of the thing. So, you know, I'd say again, as Andrew was stressing, the more people you can consult and bring in to help you on this, the better.
I think I'd also advise you to talk to the person that you want to be your sponsor or host, and establish with them what your working relationship is going to be. It's sometimes I have seen colleagues who say yes that they're going to support an application. They do mean it, but then term time hits, or they have exam marking to do, or whatever it is, and the desire kind of fades away. So I think having those conversations honestly, saying, this is what I need. Do you have the time and capacity? When can I contact you? What contribution will you make is important. And I think the second point about on that is don't expect too much. Because you know, again, academic colleagues are, as you will know, are very busy people, and so the BA costs in an hour a month of somebody's time. Now, that doesn't mean that that's literally just an hour that people are going to spend with you, but it does give you a sense of scale and the sort of the immediacy, perhaps, of the relationship.
Okay, perfect. I think it's time to wrap up now. Philip, is there anything you want to say just to conclude the session, please? And thank you, everybody. Thank you to Joseph and Andrew as well for joining us today.